And today it is the man, the myth from CBS Sports Radio, Damon Amendolara. You're an upstate New Yorker who's also a Mets fan. This is like doing a show with like my older brother.
It's very nice of you to say this. I'm very happy to be here, although I feel like me claiming upstate New York is not fair to you or the other upstate New Yorkers, because I grew up in Warwick, New York, which is the Orange County, and every time I tell anybody upstate I came from Warwick or the Hudson Valley, they're like, oh, that's the city.
No, Yonkers is upstate for most of our audience, DA. You know, and right. Speaking of, well, the Bronx, not Yonkers. We'll get to the Mets, we'll get to the Yankees in just a moment. But you heard CeeLo with the breaking news. This is huge for the New York Knicks. The Bronx stand up. Kemba Walker, Rice High School in Harlem. Kemba Walker is coming to the Knicks. You know what? DA, I like it. I really like it. It has not been a great fit for Kemba Walker in Boston. Obviously, he was coming off of an unbelievable year in Charlotte. He signs this huge contract with the Celtics, but immediately gets injured, has this knee injury. I don't think they ever really got the full Kemba Walker. And by the way, in Boston, things just weren't right with that team. This is a team that had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals with the young guys and then had been steadily declining since that happened. Brad Stevens has moved to the front office. I'm willing to believe that something was just wrong in Boston. Kemba Walker wasn't what was wrong with Boston. If his knee is fully healthy, which I think it should be at this point, he's a willing defender. He's the playmaker. I can see why Tom Thibodeau would love Kemba Walker. And you knew they weren't just going to go into the season with Derrick Rose as their starting point guard. That couldn't be. Kemba Walker's coming to the Knicks. Feels like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I think from an attitudinal standpoint, Kemba Walker's always been considered a pretty good guy and a good locker room guy and a good teammate. And so that's why I think you're right. Whatever happened in Boston certainly feels like that wasn't Kemba's chemistry issue, that there were other things beyond that. I'm not so sold on his knee, though. I think that Kemba Walker, if his knee was okay, I don't think he's given up $73 million, which is apparently what this buyout is worth. We'll see what the numbers end up being.
Who would want to play in Oklahoma City when you could play for the Knicks?
Well, I mean, $73 million is $73 million bucks.
Yeah.
So let's see what the buyout is. I think he's damaged goods, and I think that people around the league worry that that's an arthritic knee and that knee is not going to be 100%. And if that's the case, that's where you have to worry. Let's see the length of this contract that he signs with the Knicks. Let's see what the money is. If you're talking about fit, New York City, attitude, the Garden,
he's one of our own.
His legacy in the Big East tournament, that's all great, but the knee's got to hold up. So I need to see why he's available, why he's willing to be bought out. But I will say that I don't think the Knicks would have been the only suitors. It sounds like he wants to go to the Knicks. So that's a check mark in the box of the Knicks that there are other teams that would be interested as well.
Okay, here's why I'm a little less concerned about the knee than maybe you are. Going back to last season, he was still averaging over 30 minutes a game. It's not like he was a guy who was down to, had to play 22 minutes or whatever, and they felt like they really needed to manage it. Obviously, they didn't feel like they had to. Now, stats-wise, not obviously coming off of one of his best seasons, of course, but maybe if it's just sort of even a flyer on Kemba, he's 30 years old, so he's been, around a little bit. You can see that as positive or negative. But, DA, the point remains is that when I saw the Knicks free agency this year, it was like they had this glaring need, and it was starting point guard. And instead of addressing that, and I thought, well, maybe they've got something up their sleeve. They're still trying to keep the Dame Lillard thing in play, whatever. Instead, they spent a ton of money on Derrick Rose. I think, quite frankly, overpaid for Derrick Rose, even though I understand why they wanted him back so much. I thought they overpaid for Nerlens Noel. I mean, you can say Alec Burks, okay. But, it was just, an incomplete. And now, if you're going to take this flyer on Kemba, it just makes more sense. You needed another playmaker. Derrick Rose can't be a starter. He can't play starters minutes.
Undoubtedly. Going into the season with Derrick Rose as your true point guard, your top point guard, seemed like it was death waiting to happen. But Kemba, he missed 30 games last year. So that's a big chunk of time. So in the games that he played over 30 minutes by and large. But in the games that he missed a good chunk of the season. And the Celtics thought that Kemba Walker was going to be their guy. That
finishing pieces.
Setting up Jason Tatum, setting up Jaylen Brown. Yep. Kemba's the guy, good chemistry guy. Take out Kyrie and they thought that Kemba's the perfect antidote to that. he would have been if the knees stayed healthy.
That's true.
He would have been if he didn't miss that much time. He would have been if the contract was not so unwieldy. So you have to remember something. I know Knicks fans are dying for something to be optimistic about, and I get that. Look, I understand, having lived through the 90s and the glory of those Knicks teams and being glued to the TV with every one of those game 6s and game 7s, that there's been this desperation in this town for the Knicks to be good again. But I oftentimes think that Knicks fans get sucked into unbridled, unnecessary optimism when there is never proof that it turns out well, ever. So the history of the Knicks tells us Kemba's knee's going to blow up, Derrick Rose is going to collapse on the floor, and everybody else is not going to do what they thought they were going to do. That's just what history tells us. So thinking that this is going to be something else, I'm always like, let's slow the roll. There's a reason the Celtics said no, and a reason he's agreeing to a buyout of $73 million.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I also feel like you have to look at everything on its, like, for what it is. It's almost like saying, oh, I shouldn't have drafted Justin Fields because he comes from Ohio State and they never put out good quarterbacks. You know, don't you have to look at every regime on its own? Like, we can look at the Knicks as a whole over the last 20 years, and believe me, I've been critical from the top down to the point where I can't go into the Garden right now. But I do think you have to look at each regime. Yeah, when your face is up in the back, you know. I've been critical of the team, and that's an understatement. I've been critical of the owner. But I think that, like, you do have to look at each regime on its face, and this could end up being a real value play for the Knicks. They got a value play last year when their role guys really stepped up and gelled into a cohesive unit that nobody expected. And they get to the playoffs, they fell on their faces, it exposed a lot, and then they doubled down on some of those guys coming back this year. So I can understand why you'd be skeptical, but they obviously know a value. All right, it feels like this regime knows a value play when they see it. And I believe that because last year, that was the whole roster, basically. So I feel like that would be a reason to be optimistic. But yes, I mean, in terms of being snake bitten, in terms of being, you know, knocked down a couple pegs, I mean, the Knicks fan understands it. Yes.
I totally get what you're saying, and this is not a criticism of the current regime because they deserve, I think, some belief. They deserve some,
a little patience,
some optimism, because year one went really well, and Tom Thibodeau certainly erases a lot of what it has felt like has plagued the Knicks in the past. This type of fighting against this current that's going on at the Garden, and everybody has their own agendas, and one foot's out the door.
I said it's like Game of Thrones over there.
Yeah, and so Tibbs certainly brings a level of accountability and work and defense and commitment that they overachieved last year. And the belief would have to be that Tibbs has the ability to get to players like that. My only thing here is that the Knicks didn't get any of the tier A guys, the guys that you just stamp and say, you're good to go with that
Kyle
guy.
Lowry didn't want any part.
And Chris
Or
Paul.
I don't know if they were, how deep they were on Lowry, but Chris Paul, I mean, that was an uphill battle.
And there weren't a lot of tier A guys, so it's not the Knicks' fault that
I thought Lonzo was the fit. I thought Lonzo was the guy, Lonzo Ball, when you see what he went to Chicago for, 2 dudes and a second-round pick. No offense, Garrett Temple and Tomas Satoransky. But that could have been had. And then for $85 million, I still feel like Lonzo has room to go, room to grow. And like that old narrative that he's not a good shooter, he's really turned that around.
Yes. So that's a better fit. That's a better talent. That's a guy you can grow with. I'm just saying there is a reason Kemba Walker's now going to be in his third team in 4 months. That there is a yeah, but. Right. And I always guard against that in New York when Knicks fans just don't want to hear the yeah, but. There's just so many that don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And like you said, savior's a good word. Knicks fans have been looking for the savior for a long time.
Yeah, Kemba's not the savior.
And I don't know if any of these free agent signings are
Evan Fournier is not the savior. The only way they go savior hunting is the disgruntled superstar route, which could still be in play.
And Lillard is that guy. That's the savior type guy. But I mean, let's also remember the Eastern Conference here. And this is a great way for me to introduce myself once again to the New York market just by dumping cold water all over the biggest news of the day. This is kind of perfect. I'm sure everybody hates just listening to this show right now. But the point is, in the Eastern Conference, if the Nets are healthy, and the Bucks are the champs, and the Sixers have Embiid and whoever they get for Simmons or with Simmons, and the Heat just got Kyle Lowry, and the Hawks just beat you in the first round, and the Celtics should probably be better than a 500 team than last year. We're now talking about, and the Bulls should probably be better after all their additions. the Knicks could be the 8th best team in their own conference, with or without Kemba Walker.
So it's now just the Maggie show here on WFAN-DA. It's been really great having you sit in an excellent 16
Maggie will
minutes.
take you from here.
I'm going to take you home today. No, listen, this is going to be a lot of fun. We have to get into the Mets as well. So got big news there with the Knicks, or biggish news.
Biggish is good. Yeah.
With Kemba Walker signing with the Knicks, okay. Also got the Mets from last night, and there's not a Met fan that I know, unless you are totally head buried in the sand or totally blue and orange colored glasses. There is not a Mets fan that I would know who can't be panicking right now. I mean, hell, even the owner is basically panicking when he puts out on Twitter, we better pick this thing up. I mean, I can't even imagine, DA, if I was a member of the Mets and I see that the owner is tweeting out, we got to get our act together soon. Like I'm like, me? Are you talking? Is that me? Like, am I out of here? I'd be very worried about that. I'd be concerned because it feels like the owner is concerned. So that just adds to the pressure of a team that's already lost 5 of 6. And now Taijuan Walker, that is legit. You know, whether or not he wants to say that he's not feeling fatigued because now he's topped over 100 innings, which is something he hasn't done since 2017. Fatigue doesn't mean that we're throwing 97 and now you're throwing 85. Fatigue means you're still throwing 96, 97, but you can't locate it. Everything's been up, and by extension, out of the ballpark. He's now given up more home runs in the 4 starts since the All-Star break that he did in the entire first half of the season. I appreciate the confidence that Taijuan Walker continues to show, but the fact is, it is impossible not to be concerned about him. And because the Mets failed to create any real distance between themselves and the rest of the teams in the NL East, they can't really afford right now to even give him a break, give him a blow, so to speak. You know, they can't even say, sit down for a week, sit down for 2, try to find, get right, get your energy back, whatever it is, right? They can't afford to do that. We are all now waiting on this next MRI from Jacob deGrom because, according to him yesterday, this could be the make or break whether or not he comes back this season. If you are a Met fan and you are not panicking right now, I got to question your true Met fan credentials.
Yeah, the 2 things that you mentioned are really important. Number one is that they just refused to create the separation that they needed to do so in the first half of the season, the first number of months of the season, where this should be a 6 or 7 game lead. This should have been a much bigger cushion, maybe even more, had they played up to said potential and the rest of the division was doing what they were doing. That's the first issue, is that suddenly 3.5 becomes 1.5, and you're like, oh my God, 1.5. This is a disaster. It should have been 7.5 to 5.5. Doesn't feel like that much of a disaster. The second thing is, this pitching rotation was truly deGrom, and then everything else kind of stitched together. And without deGrom, without that pivot, without that fulcrum, if Taijuan Walker is your guy, you're getting exposed. And now he's getting exposed. And even if it's only 4 starts, the Mets didn't create the separation to afford the 4 starts. The rotation doesn't have the ability or the depth to survive those 4 starts. With Taijuan Walker, is he going to be this bad the rest of the way? Probably not. But this is, again,
got a 12 ERA.
it's just this kind of like fork in the road where his timing is terrible with the team's timing, which is terrible with the reality of the situation. So the Lindor injury and the deGrom injury bring everything else into focus and put so much more pressure on guys that are not living up to it. And it's a shame that they can't, because there's a clear opportunity to do so. But panic has obviously got to be part of the equation here, because if you lose the division lead and now suddenly you are chasing, I mean, the pressure only ratchets up, especially from the expectations. And if deGrom can't come back, now you're kind of like, we're just muddling through the rest of the month and a half, and it's never going to feel all that optimistic.
No, especially if the offense can't pick up for the deficiencies in the starting rotation. You're going to be asking, obviously, even more than you're getting from Stroman, who's had an unbelievable season. Carrasco now, no wiggle room there. He's got to be an absolute stalwart. And then you're hoping that Tyler McGill and Rich Hill are going to get you home. I mean, that's going to be really, really tough. Really tough. Even though the Phillies and the Atlanta Braves aren't any great shakes, I'm looking at the playoff projection for the Mets, and it's under 50% for the first time in 2 months. I mean, that has got to send you just out of your mind. And oh, by the way, you lose to the Marlins. listen, any team can lose to any team, but you've lost the last two against the Marlins. You got a huge series coming up in Philadelphia this weekend, but that's not even like where the real potholes or the real obstacles come. From August 13th to August 26th, you have a 13-game stretch where the only two teams you play are the Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants. I mean, if you can't put it together and try to get some wins when you're playing the Marlins and now you just got to hope for a split with the last two games of this 4-game set, I mean, what's going to happen when this team faces two of the best teams in baseball?
That is, again, where the pressure starts building, because if you fall behind the Phillies and now you're a game back or 2 games back or a game and a half back, and now you're losing 3 of 4 to the Dodgers, or you're losing 7 of 10 to the Dodgers and Giants, or even worse, it doesn't matter what's happening ahead of you. You just can't get out of your own way. Right. So the timing here is just really, really terrible, because you're already taking on water, and then it's like, oh, there's the iceberg as well. We got to navigate that iceberg as well as we are drowning here.
Well, and also the Phillies aren't even a good team, and you're going to let them back in this race. You've already let them back in this race, and it's just like, why is this team underachieving in the way they have? I understand there's been injuries, totally understand, and I appreciate Brandon Nimmo being out there in a bad hamstring. I appreciate Jeff McNeil playing even though he's on a bum leg. I appreciate these guys pushing through, but I mean, underachieving. Even with all that.
Yeah, and that's why I don't mind Steve Cohen saying we got to pick it up, because, if they don't, the season's toast anyway.
Right.
So apply the pressure now, try to wake up these guys, try to see if it might stir the pot enough. I'm sure they're all feeling it. I'm sure they understand, but it's a little different when your boss says pick it up,
Is it lose a little bit, though, when Cohen says we got to get our act together, but he's acknowledging I'm at dinner with my daughter? You guys, I'm at dinner. Right. So I'm here, probably at whatever the Four Seasons eating. Yeah. But, you guys get it together.
Yeah. This ribeye not going to eat itself.
That's true. Don't want it to go to waste, DA.
But I would like you guys to pick it up in the meantime, so that when I come home and I watch Geico Sports Night, I'm not actually throwing things against the wall as well, because this meal's really good.
Yeah, it's like, I'll have the surf and turf and also a little more production from my biggest hitters, please. Thank you so much. The caviar, not tonight. All right, it's Damon Amendolara in for Moose today, 877-337-6666. So got some cool Knicks news on the top. Maybe cool. I don't know. DA hates it, but then again, that's
Hate
DA.
Is strong. Hate is strong.
DA is telling Kemba Walker to pack his bags and get out of town. Yeah. I'm saying welcome with open arms. If you want to respond to that, if you think this is a good move, bad move, let us know. Also, if you're a Met fan and if you are not seriously concerned right now, I'll say panic. You should be panicked. I'm questioning your Mets credentials. We're going to get into so much more as the next 4 hours continue. We've got Giants. We've got Jets. We've got so much fun on the way.